Welcome to Off the Record, a legal podcast.
Hello and welcome to Off the Record, a legal podcast with attorney Rhett Burney. My name is Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is all about grandparents' rights in South Carolina. Rhett, it's so good to see you again. Welcome back.
Hey, Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing great. Excited to chat with you again. Today we're talking about something that's a little bit different. We're going to talk about grandparents' rights in South Carolina. Under what circumstances can grandparents seek visitation rights in South Carolina?
It's a question we get all the time, right? Because we have grandparents who are just so involved with children. But, the court first starts out looking to see, is one of the parents, one or both of the parents, are they dead? Are they divorced? Are they living apart? Or separate habitats? And if so, then the court starts its analysis. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. But usually that's when the court get involved if the grandparents are wanting to get involved and to seek some type of visitation rights or even custody rights. Now, of course, in South Carolina, anybody can ask for custody of a child. So ultimately, the court has to determine what's in the best interest of the child. But in the situation where we have, let's just say, both parents that are still alive and together, the court looks at that type of situation. The court's going to look to see, are these parents fit? And then if they are not fit, then the court will continue its analysis to see what is in the best interest of the child. So that's the general overview of how the court looks at it.
Okay, so, balancing parental rights with a grandparent's interest, or an interest in maintaining a relationship with a grandchild, I would think could be a little bit tricky, right?
Yeah, very tricky, especially in those situations where the grandparents were involved for a while.
Yeah.
I'm a grandparent. We work with our grandson all the time, have him lots of times, and can't even imagine what it would be like if we were not able to see him. And a lot of grandparents are faced with that. So, that starts the analysis. What type of involvement did the grandparents have with the child or children, their grandchild or grandchildren, prior to the case being brought? And once the court starts looking into that, that's when it gets really, really complicated to see, what was that involvement like? How long has it been since the grandparents have been allowed to see the child, and will allowing the grandparents to see that child, will that interfere in any way with the parent and child relationship?
Yeah, like your point. I mean, grandparents are very involved. A lot more. I feel like today than they maybe were in previous generations. So, what happens if there's a problem with one of the parents, where maybe they have addiction problems, or for whatever reason they're just really unable to see their kid? Does that person's grandparents still have a right to see that kid?
Yeah, they do. Let me tell you, the typical situation that we see. And of course, everything has a little bit of nuance here and there, but we see one of several situations. The first one is where, the parent or parents just weren't up to being able to parent that child. And so the grandparents had to step in for a period of time, raise that child, paid to keep that child up. And then the parents either decide they are better now or can raise this child, and they come back into the picture. And that's usually the most common situation. And at that point in time, the court has to look and see, what is in the best interest of the child. Why were the parents outside of the child's life to begin with, and where are they now? So that's generally the situation that we run into. We also have those situations where you may have, two parents not married, and one of them dies, and so the living parent all of a sudden cuts off the visitation rights with the deceased parents, the grandparents, and are no longer allowing them to visit. Then we start looking to see how long has it been since the grandparents have been allowed to see that child or children. Usually if it's been more than 90 days, that allows the grandparents to get their foot in the door with the court. And then the court has to make that analysis. Will allowing these grandparents step into the role of visiting with this child, will that interfere with the living parents' ability to parent that child? and will it have any type of detrimental effect upon that relationship between the living parent and the child?
Is that kind of the only legal threshold that grandparents must meet, is to show that that they are an important part of the child's life, or are there more requirements in order to be granted court-ordered visitation?
Yeah, that legal threshold, it's got to be clear and convincing evidence, which if you looked at the different tiers of evidence that the court has presented and how the court has to look at it, that's the highest. So it's a pretty tough burden. But at the end of the day, it's always going to be what is in the best interest of that child. So if you're a grandparent and you're wanting to establish some type of visitation with your grandchild, the first thing you're going to have to show is that you had a relationship at a period of time. I think that's the
Mhm.
strongest part of it. If you have a newborn child that just comes into the world, and the parents aren't allowing the grandparents to visit, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, I think, for the grandparents to make a case that they should be allowed to visit, unless you have a deceased parent in that sense.
I would imagine that in the case where both parents are deceased, that it's not too difficult for a grandparent to be granted primary custody. Assuming everything else goes right. Are there other situations where grandparents can ever be granted primary custody?
Yeah, absolutely. They're looked at just like anybody can ask for custody in South Carolina, assuming it's in the best interest of the child.
Even
So
if the parents are alive, and yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, okay,
because
got it.
right, because we're talking about two different things. There's a big difference between custody and visitation, right?
Mhm. That's true.
So, but if the parents of the child are fit, not a very good chance that the grandparents will get any type of custody of that child. That's when you start looking into the visitation aspect of it. Yeah, it's not unusual to have, one parent or two parents that are deceased or incarcerated or have some type of addiction issue that renders them unfit or unable to take care of their child. Grandparents can then petition the court to ask for custody.
Okay, and to what you said before, so anybody really can at that moment ask or request custody.
Yeah, and of court's going to probably look at the relationship these grandparents had and see how close are they with this child. You could have a brother or a sister come in who could very much get custody over a grandparent if they have the type of relationship that's better than the grandparent had. It can get very, very complicated, depending upon what the specific situation looks like.
So in a situation where if grandparents have visitation rights, and a parent, there's termination of one of the parents' rights. Does that affect grandparent access?
Well, it can.
It can. Okay.
Yeah, and that's where it gets very, very difficult. You have to look at the specific facts. Let's say one of the parents' parental rights are terminated, and the grandparents who are there, they want to come in and visit the child. And again, we look and see what type of relationship they've had in the past. When is the last time they visited, and what is in the best interest? And that's why it's so hard. We have grandparents call us all the time, and they Google, what are grandparents' visitation rights, and there's no cookie cutter answer to that. We really have to dive into the specific type of relationship that they have. What are all the logistics, the semantics, everything that's going on in this particular situation, because none of them are the same. There's always some variable in there that will affect what a court will do. So it's very, very important that if you're a grandparent and you're seeking or wanting to ask questions or wanting custody or wanting visitation with your grandchild, you need to see a lawyer as soon as possible, because every situation is usually different, and we have to look at that and see how the court will look at it, give our opinion. Is there a lot of evidence, clear and convincing evidence, or is there not? So those are the types of things that are very difficult just for a grandparent. When we sit down with them and talk with them, we've got to get into the facts, because they're very, very important in these types of cases.
Do you often get grandparents contacting you for help in these
Yeah.
situations?
Yeah, very much so. I don't know what it is, but there are a lot of grandparents out there raising their grandchildren. And when they are, and a parent decides they want to come back into the picture, the grandparents come to us and they want to know what their rights are in that particular situation. And of course, there's so many different variables. How long have they had this child? Why was the parent outside of their life? How old is the child? How long have they been in their life? Those are the types of things we have to look at. And even then, you're never going to be able to give a grandparent a black and white answer or guarantee of what the court's going to do, because the situation always changes.
Yeah, and so if the parents are fit to be parents and but for whatever reason they're denying the grandparents any sort of visitation or access, the grandparents can in that situation, even if they have a contentious relationship with the parents, can they still go to court and ask for visitation?
They can ask. It's going to be very, very tough. If you have two fit
Really?
parents and the grandparents want to be involved, and those are the only facts, then I think it's going to be very, very difficult to establish any type of visitation rights. And we have those cases. We always hope that the parents, if these grandparents have been involved at all, can see the benefit to have a grandparent for a grandchild, assuming the grandparents are reasonable as well. There are parents out there who have very good reason why grandparents should not be involved with their children. So you got to look at that as well. It's not just the want by the grandparent that starts the case. It's, are they even able or capable of visiting these children or even having custody of them?
Yeah, and what is the reason that the parents are hesitant or flat out denying access to the grandkids? You'd think
Yeah.
there'd be they'd have a reason for it.
Sometimes it's just pure family dynamics, right?
Yeah, yeah.
There's
Wait,
nobody
are you saying that family dynamics can be difficult?
just maybe yours, Kevin, but not
Maybe not.
No, they're the worst, right? Family dynamics can be very, very difficult. And it's
Yeah.
personalities. Personalities can run or ruin a case. And if the people will hold children back from visiting their grandparents, or just despite that grandparent, who knows why, sometime in the past there may have been some type of upheaval in the family, but yeah, it happens quite often that they just, parent just doesn't want the grandparent to be involved for whatever reason.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know a lot of people that have contentious relationship with their parents, so I can imagine they might have a little bit of a weird situation with their kids being around the grandparents in those situations. Is it difficult? Like, do you have grandparents that come to you that really don't want to go to litigation, but are trying to preserve this relationship? And how do you give them advice? How do you coach them through this?
Yeah, and those are difficult too, right? Because they're trying to play both sides of the fence, because they don't want to make the other side mad, the parents mad, so they never get involved. So a lot of times we'll reach out, depending upon how bad the relationship is. We may reach out, write a letter to the parents, say, we've spoken with these grandparents of this child or children, and they would really like to have a little bit of time, whether it's for a few hours or a day or whenever. And we want to get some type of relationship going. But it's going to look. You always have to get back into what the history of the case looked like before the lawyer was ever brought into the picture.
And I'm assuming it's not just for grandparents. I mean, there's aunts, uncles, that kind of stuff, that cousins, whatever, that maybe were involved and aren't anymore. Do they have the same rights as the grandparents to seek visitation?
Well, in South Carolina, there is a specific statute that deals with grandparents only.
Ah,
So, with that question, I would tell you, I think the grandparents are put in a better position than an aunt or an uncle. If we were just talking about, is there a law that deals with visitation for a family member? I think the grandparents would be on top with that. They're not going to be ideally, they're not going to be equally looked at like an aunt or an uncle. I think the grandparents are going to be given priority over them, all things equal.
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I could see that. All right. Well, interesting stuff for sure. Thanks for tuning in to Off the Record, a legal podcast with attorney Rhett Burney. For more information or to connect with Rhett and his team, you can visit rhettburney.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. We greatly appreciate it. Rhett, it's always great to see you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Kevin. Take care.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.